welcome back to the Ascent. It's only been like over a year since we last streamed. And we are late, and it's 100% my fault. It's all my fault. It's, I'm sure people will be glad to hear a woman admit when she's wrong, or maybe
Are we
just
late or are we early? That's
where.
actually the
That's
question.
the good question. So I told Nick like 7 o'clock because I was expecting my husband to not be home yet. And so in my mind, I was like planning for getting dinner on the table for the kids and then clean up and getting them ready for bed and then streaming and then doing bedtime with them afterwards. But he happens to be home. And so I was shifting things around in my tiny little brain, and I forgot to include Nick on that. And I was like, hey, guess what? We're streaming at 6 instead. So here we are, except for that Nick didn't know, which is why we're 10 minutes late because he had to get on here. So thanks for joining, by the way. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, no worries. This should be fun.
Okay, so let's talk about the topic because I threw it out to you. I was like, we should do a stream. We haven't done one in a while, especially on the Ascent for Meaning of Catholic. And of course, we're streaming to both of our own channels as well. But like, I threw it out to you and was like, what are you thinking would be a good topic? And what were the three or the couple of D's you came up with? The demonic, dating, and then we sort of were throwing around like what might go well with those topics because you were recently on retreat and had some things kind of come up during your retreat that you felt like, well, you'd like to share more about that. And you and I have talked pretty extensively about the dating culture currently that you in particular are facing. So what were your thoughts on that? Why did you think like we should talk about this particular topic?
Yeah, I think that both the world of courtship and the world of the demonic, unfortunately, are becoming more and more tied together. And I say that just because it's interesting that when you look at it, what takes place is that our society is really utilitarian. This is something that you and I have talked about kind of behind the scenes, but our society is really utilitarian. For people out there in the audience, what that means is our society is kind of geared towards seeking out pleasure and avoiding suffering or pain. Right. And so you can think of that in whatever context you want. You can think of that on the one hand of things like, I don't want to suffer in the context of, going and planting crops. I would rather go to the grocery store. Right. And so we build up convenience stores or grocery stores. I don't want to suffer, let's just say in our own day when it comes to other weird things like commitment. So I'll just date around. I don't want to suffer in the context of picking up the phone. So I'll give a text message. Basically, there's all these weird types of things that we try to avoid when it comes to suffering in our own society. And I thought that ultimately what this does is it actually doesn't conform us to Christ or to how he suffered, even though, again, like Christ's suffering is different than ours. But the point is that we're supposed to take all of our sufferings and use Christ as our model, right? St. Peter talks about this in his epistle when he says that Christ has given us an example how to suffer and how to suffer well. And so I thought, hey, the subject of suffering, it ties in pretty well with my retreat, which we'll get into. It definitely ties in with the spiritual war, and both of them tie in with, courtship and things along that nature and taking up one's cross. So this should be a fun conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you brought up the demonic element, it's something just in general. I've been talking a lot with other people behind the scenes about spiritual warfare. I just actually recorded an interview with Jordan Burke on this topic of spiritual warfare and even like therapy and things like that, where they overlap, all of that kind of stuff. But I think the demonic influence we sort of overlook in dating culture, at least we acknowledge it in birth control and abortion, all of those things which are tangential to dating culture right now as part of it. But the other aspect, and you touched on it in a stream that you did, is related to the utilitarian aspect. A lot of dating is centered on what do I get out of it?
Yeah.
And using the other person. I mean, that's kind of the root of dating apps. It really treats people like objects and denigrates them like you're going to swipe right or swipe left based on their utility, perceived utility. And so that really is a demonic thing as well, because really inherently to the dignity of the human person is that it's not about our utility for the other, but it's about this act of self-giving in true marital love. That's the goal. And so this perversion that we're seeing in something as simple as dating apps, it really highlights how the demonic has come in and influenced this culture in ways that are so subversive that people don't even realize until I think we take time to reflect on it.
Yeah, very, very true. Very, very true.
So what kind of, when you went into your retreat, see, this is like turning into an interview. What When you went on retreat, what were you going into your retreat thinking about? What was, I think a lot of times we might go into a retreat thinking like, I'm going to be praying a lot about this particular thing. And sometimes our Lord answers kind of what we're going into the retreat with, that's on our heart, or he reveals to us something completely different that needs to be addressed that we didn't even realize was bubbling under the surface. So what was the case for you?
Yeah. So for people who don't know, I went on a 5-day silent SSPX Ignatian retreat. And so we had one over at Sanctus Ranch here in Texas, which is a pretty cool Catholic retreat center people can check out. And what took place, kind of going into it, was some interesting things. I went into it, one, because basically 3 reasons. One, I wanted to understand St. Ignatius's spirituality in the context of spiritual warfare better, because I think I was introduced to Ignatian thought in kind of an unhealthy context. I think Ignatian thought is one, with all the different, if you will, charisms in the church. Of course, you have to present them in a right light. For instance, like it's very, very easy for people to just kind of pick up some stuff that St. Thomas has said and divorce it from the rest of what he's talking about, and they kind of become rationalistic, right? This is something where the popes have actually had to come out multiple times and condemn the notion that scholasticism leads to rationalism. And this is because I think that people kind of just pick up rational truths and then they kind of just make the faith just a bunch of rational things, as opposed to recognizing, yo, there's some stuff about faith that we can never put under a microscope, like the Trinity, things like
Hmm.
that.
Things
But I
that are
wanted to
more
understand.
mysterious. Yeah.
Exactly. There are true and proper mysteries in faith. And what was interesting about this when it came to Ignatius and thought is that in my initial conversion, I had been exposed to kind of just, let's say, the colloquial vocational discernment with St. Ignatius. But it was very, very subjectivistic, because a lot of it just was basically things like, look inside yourself and see what you're leaning
Mm-hmm.
toward. And it's, that can, in a maybe very limited circumstance, maybe help a bit, only a bit, but really it's not that helpful. So I knew that that wasn't a good view of St. Ignatius's thought. So I wanted to actually get a better exposure. That was the first thing. Two, I wanted to participate in kind of the cool sacramental realities that will be taking place in the retreat. So, for instance, one of the things you do is a general confession during the retreat of all the sins of your past life, which is pretty good. Everyone should do that. It's very, very good. And then the third one is I had just certain questions that I wanted to wrestle out with God. In particular, how it pertains to this was, Lord, what do you really want to call me toward? What in fact is my vocation? I'm using vocation as a catch-all term in this
Mm-hmm.
context. And so going into the retreat, it was crazy. This is where the crazy stories start. So it's about an hour and a half drive from my house to Sanctus Ranch. I get within like 5 minutes from the retreat center. And, it's Texas. Everything's 107 degrees. And what takes place is that 5 minutes before I hit the retreat center, my air conditioner just shuts off. And I'm thinking like, is this, just it blowing out or something like that? And I thought it was weird because I just recently changed it, maybe like a year ago. So it wasn't that long ago that it was fixed. And so naturally, as a guy, my reaction is I got to look at this thing, right, to see what's going on. Well, so I pull into the retreat center, get all checked. I plan on going and looking at this sometime during the retreat, right? Just going and taking a look at the truck and seeing if I can figure out what's going on. Well, it's crazy. We had 3 priests that were there. And the preacher who was preaching the whole retreat, right, the main priest, his name is Father Asher. He's an old society priest that could easily pass for a military chaplain. Like he just knows how to preach to men in particular. He said at the very, very beginning, whatever reason you came for on this retreat, shut it out of your mind completely. No distractions, no nothing. You can't think of anything, but you have to focus in on the truths that you're going to get in this retreat. You have to give it your 110% effort. And so that's why we all give up the phones, right? So no use of phones for 5 days. We don't talk to anybody, right? Unless it's an emergency for 5 days. It's just you, the Bible with some meditations, essentially, and that is it. right? And you're going to listen to preaching and go to mass and things like that. So it struck me in that moment, could this be some like weird demonic attack? I mean, it might sound kind of weird, but think about it. It's like my brain is in I need to fix the car mode. And yet now I'm being told, don't think of anything, no distractions, anything. Just focus in on this. So do you want to say anything before I continue the story? Because otherwise
No,
I'll rattle on.
no, I mean, I feel like stuff like that happens a lot for me, especially when I do finally become more diligent about streaming and things like that. Like anytime I'm going to do something that is even remotely evangelistic in nature, um or working on my prayer life in some way, the enemy just like flares up. I remember the last time I went on retreat, actually the only silent retreat I've ever been on, because I didn't really know retreats were a thing until after I had started having kids, and it's really hard to obviously leave really young children to go on retreat. So I went on one retreat, one silent retreat, and at the time I was nursing one of my kiddos, and I forgot like something like a breast pump to help me while I was still nursing, and I was in so much pain. It gets very painful if you can't um, get that taken care of. And so that made it very hard to pray properly the way that I would have liked to, because I was in tremendous pain and like worried about what am I going to do. And then my husband had to drive in with all the kids. I think we had 4 at the time. No, we had 5. So that was, yeah, when I had Veronica. So 5 kids, and he packed them all up, drove into the cities where I was staying on retreat, and dropped it off one day. And and I felt like the worst wife ever, because I always am like, I'm very forgetful. And so I just like felt really bad and like a burden, all of those things, like those patterns of thought that you become very accustomed to, that become wounds that the enemy likes to attack. He knew I was vulnerable that way. And it took me a while to realize like he is working on those thought patterns trying to prevent me from like getting anything out of this retreat, or like encountering God in a meaningful way. And the exact opposite ended up happening. Actually, it just turned into like a beautiful thing. And it was a great way that my husband was able to remind me that he's very Christ-like in a lot of ways. Like he never made me feel bad or anything like that. It was just like he was able to serve me that way. And that was it. So it was a really beautiful experience, even though the first day or so I was really stressing. So
Yeah.
anyway, similar kind of thing.
Yeah, I can imagine. What's crazy about these retreats, at least for us, was we had 2 different, I think it was the first day, 2 different lectures on basically the general format of what the retreat was going to be like. And essentially it was in total like a good, 4 hours or so of just being told, focus in on this, focus in on this. You have to give it your all. You have to give it your all, and things like that. And then the next 2 days, right? So the Tuesday and the Wednesday, you do your morning prayers with the community, you go to mass, but you actually don't receive communion. And the idea behind this is that we're kind of looking at some really tough truths that need to be examined first. And then the joy of the reception of communion can come after these kind of spiritual hurdles that are done, if that makes sense. And so what's interesting about all of this is that the first day, basically it opens up with the subject of what is the meaning of life, right? It's to know, love, and serve God, and to know God, or to be with God in heaven, right? That's the idea. And what ends up taking place from all of this is that uh, you see the people's mindset, I think, change. They recognize that this is going to be, at least in the beginning, kind of an uncomfortable retreat. So we get this first talk, right? What's the purpose of life? You go and you meditate about some truths. We have another talk that's about the right use of creatures. That might sound kind of weird, right? Because we don't speak like that in common
Mm-hmm.
English. But what that basically means is all the stuff that's around us, whether it be people or physical objects, how do we rightly use them, right? Not using in an immoral sense, but how do we rightly work with them,
Yeah.
interact with them for our
Mm-hmm.
salvation? And so we focus in on that. Now, this is what's crazy. The second half of Monday and all of Tuesday, we focus in on death, sin, and hell. over and over and over again. And so our preacher kind of reminded me of St. Alphonsus Liguori in the sense that if people have read St. Alphonsus, St. Alphonsus is really good about pulling out all of these quotations from the saints and from the scriptures and linking them together in, kind of a narrative format for the presentation of his sermon topic.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, he didn't do that so much, but he was good when it came to military stories. But he would be talking about like the sufferings of soldiers in prison and all these really dark stories and things like this that he would remember. And he'd be talking about them and he'd get your skin crawling and then he'd just beat into your head, and hell is so much worse. And so it was funny, basically all of Tuesday up until dinner time at 6 o'clock. It's all silent. We're just doing all these meditations slowly on hell. We're thinking about things like, what does hell feel like? What does hell sound like? What does hell look like? What does hell, what is the smell like? Things along this nature. And it's just really beating into, because if you think about this, like by dinner time, you've had about 4 hours of mental prayer on hell, right? That's a long time, right? To think about hell. And so I remember basically going to dinner and all of our meals are silent. You just hear a reading, right? Kind of like in a monastery. And I sit down and the reading for that evening is a letter of a soul in hell. Like I was hoping to basically have a little bit of reprieve from all of this, but yeah, we hear this private revelation of this soul that appeared and told her sister what hell was like and things like that. We're meditating on things like, what are all the graces that you and I refused in our lifetime? All the graces that God gave that we refused. What is all of the times that God gave us chances to repent and yet we didn't? What about the malice of our own sin? Things like this. By Tuesday evening, right, pretty much everybody, including myself, is pretty close to the point of despair, right? I think they try to, St. Ignatius tries to get you to that like point for a reason. And for me anyway, this is why I told people, if you're super scrupulous, don't go on this retreat. But for me, what helped me is I had to cling on to what I knew to be true as opposed to what I was feeling. Because what I was feeling was there's no way I could ever go to heaven. It's pretty much over. Wednesday morning comes around. Howdy, everyone. We're going to talk again about hell. All right. We're waking up talking again about hell. And so it's just like it continues over and over and over again. And so by the end of, let's just say most of the day, by the time the afternoon starts, we finally all of a sudden have a shift. And it is the glory of the cross of Christ, the love of Christ in dying for man. And we have this really, really beautiful meditation and then our general confessions. And so basically what this leads you up to is it wants you to see the horror of sin, but then the beauty of the cross of Christ, right? The realities of hell, but the beauty of the cross of Christ. And so it's funny, it was really cool seeing, I think there's about 30 of us guys, each one of these guys doing, these like 40-minute long confessions about the whole course of their life and things like that. That was pretty amazing. So what makes it special is that on Thursday morning, it's in a way kind of like your first communion. It's your first communion again, once you've decided to make, if you will, a firm resolution to leave this world of sin. And so for the next days, right, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, you're basically meditating upon all the mysteries of the rosary. You're thinking about the whole life of Christ. So on Thursday, about all the joyful mysteries. Friday, right, it's a really sorrowful day. Again, you're thinking about all the sufferings of Christ. And then on Saturday, all the glories of Christ and the resurrection. So it's really well balanced. It's not, even though I emphasized in the beginning of the story a lot about hell, truly it is very, very balanced in the preaching, which is very, very good. And what was cool is that by the end of this, right, I walked out finding out the answers to all three of my questions, which we'll get into if you want. But that's at least the timeline of what took place.
Okay, so what were the 3 questions then that you went into? Because, like, I know I went into my retreat with, like, definitely certain things on my heart, and I felt like God God showed up in a huge way for me. I feel like some people sort of have mixed experiences. Like some women that were there during the silent retreat, um, they really struggled. They really struggled with the silence and feelings of despair, things like that. And I, on the other hand, I was like, man, this is so nice. Like I felt like my soul at that time was such a desert, and
Hmm.
finding silence is very hard, obviously, when you have a bunch of little kids. And so I remember I felt so good being in silence. Like I actually kind of am I think I would be considered like an extroverted introvert. Like I love the silence.
Hmm.
I love it. And so at one point I had to catch myself. I started like I was singing quietly to myself because I was so excited and felt like I just loved every second of it. I was like, oh, I can't do that right now. But yeah, I had a great experience. So anyway, God showed up in a big way for me. But what about you? Like, what were those three questions that you went in with, and how does it relate to this overall topic? Because I do want to dive into like why do we keep returning to this topic of like Gen Z dating, marriage, what this looks like? Why is this important that we keep talking about it?
Yeah, so I'll answer the first two kind of not as related what like subject matter first. So the first one was I wanted to get a better understanding of Ignatius's thought, which I did. I actually got this notebook here and I scribbled down in the entire thing, just all of these notes from it. And I learned that Saint Ignatius's method, it's not subjectivistic. It's very much so rooted in reason. One just has to, I think, apply the principles well. And so without telling you all of the principles, just two that really stuck with me. One of them, this will tie into the dating conversation a little bit, but one of the principles was any type of propositional statement that comes to you, right, that disturbs your peace is not from God. So, what does that mean? If you guys are in prayer or in discernment, and then all of a sudden you just hear these statements that say, if you don't do this, you will go to hell, right? And what you're thinking about is not actually some matter of salvation, right? So, as an example, it could be something like a scrupulous soul, who's praying, and then they just hear something like, um, even though you've gone to confession already, it wasn't really valid. You know what I'm saying? Like that would
Mm-hmm.
be a good example for a
Oh yeah.
scrupulous soul.
Yep.
And
I've
so
struggled with
it,
that at different periods of my life. Yes. Mm-hmm.
exactly. And so like that's a principle that Saint Ignatius looks at and says that's from what he calls the bad spirit, right? The demonic. It could be, well, the bad spirit could be from the world, it could be from the flesh or from the devil, right? One of those three things.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a good example, right? Something that's actually disturbing your peace that's not rooted in reason is something that's bad. On the other end of the spectrum, right, one has to look at things like the reality of the good spirit, for instance, maybe like even our guardian angel who convicts us when we're messing up, right? And so one of the
Mm-hmm.
most I would say truly like terrifying realities that when it came to the meditations was the recognition that especially people, and this is important for all of us to remember, if you're going on committing again and again and again and again and again mortal sin, and you're just using the confessional as a revolving door, and deep down you're not actually making a sincere amendment of life. A sincere amendment of life is proven by your actions, right? So like if you struggle with internet pornography, this means like putting up blockers and getting accountability, right? If you're not
Mm-hmm.
doing that, then you're not actually that contrite about it. um if you continuously do this over and over and over again, right, your guardian angel, he's knocking on the soul of your heart. He's pricking you with the pitchfork of conscience, if you will. But what happens one day when God says no more and the angel stops? You've now been given over to it and you're no
Mm-hmm.
longer even sorry. Right, you're just going on and on and on repeating these sins and you're no longer even sorry. Right? This is something that's pretty bad, right? And so
Well, it
this
kind of
was
goes to
some
the saying like sin makes you stupid, right?
yeah.
Like it does because it deadens the intellect and our capacity in the soul to receive God's grace and to be aware of it. So, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Hmm.
Yeah, it's completely true. It's something that does make you stupid, and it's something that's fearful if you're given over to it. So learning these things, right? This was an answer from God, right? Learning these discernment things. The second thing was just a good piece of conscience for receiving, having all of my sins again, brought forward to the tribunal of confession, right? That was the second thing that was just really refreshing to see take place, and that's kind of self-evident, right? You come with a mountain of, at least in my case, 27 years worth of stuff. And if you're like me, you can remember quite a bit. And so bringing it, doing it by the book, right, with a priest who actually knows his moral theology helps. And it's so funny because it's like every time I go to a society priest, I feel like I'm actually talking to a priest who knows what he's doing. And I'm not saying that just because I'm a trad. I'm saying that just because I'm a moral theologian student and I kind of rate my confessors. I maybe need to make an app one day called like Rate Your Confessors.
But
And I
also,
could
could that not be a point of pride a little bit? I mean,
no. It's
I get
literally
the
stuff where it's like
instinct, but
it's
like,
it's literally where I was thinking about this yesterday. I was like, I think I've had to correct 7 priests and teach them the form. Like they've not even
oh,
gotten "I
dude,
absolve you" correctly,
no.
And so I'm like, yeah, maybe I need to make an app called like rateyourconfessor.com or something.
Oh my,
It's somewhat tongue in cheek, but I mean there is some serious problems out there.
there's
Um,
no doubt about that.
but how it leads into this third subject, which will lead us into our broader conversation, was the subject of my vocation, asking the question, okay, Lord, I have not had any success. Do you want me to be a priest? Do you want me to be religious? Do you want me just to wait a lot longer? What is it entirely? And it was really weird. Like the first 2 days, right before the confession, I'm just kind of wrestling with these questions back and forward in my head. And then randomly out of nowhere, I get these thoughts that I've had for a long time, but I've not thought about in quite a bit. And it's these really strong statements that would start like just crashing in. And it would be statements like, if you don't become a priest, you will go to hell. If you don't become a religious, you will go to hell. If you get married, you will not be able to serve God. It was these thoughts that would just like out of nowhere
Hmm.
bombarding my mind.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm wrestling with these things, and then I'm thinking, wait a minute. This is literally the propositional thing that he's talking about from the bad spirit. This is
Hmm.
nuts. But how do I know? Is this absolutely, let me figure this out. Basically, I'm kind of wrestling back and forth. And so I go, you can go and talk to the priest about kind of what you're finding. That's the only context you can talk in. And so I finally went and I talked to a really good priest that's from over in Dickinson. He was out there to see us. Father Purdy, super tall. He's like 6'7", like super tall dude. And
Wow, he's a
we're talking.
giant. Yeah,
It's kind of a joke with there's a few of you guys from the SSPX in the chat I
is he
recognize, and
Goliath?
you guys can confirm for me that it's like the stereotype is that like SSPX priests always have to be like tall and handsome. I don't know what the thing is, but like that, I don't know if that's like an unspoken requirement, but that seems to be what it is. So I'm going and I'm talking with this priest and I bring this forward to him. And one of St. Ignatius's discussions is also things like, when in doubt at the very end of, if you've discerned for a really long time, sometimes just think about this question. If you were to talk to yourself, like another version of yourself, right, sitting across from you with all your faults and habits, weaknesses, tendencies, etc., what advice would you give him? And through talking with the priest, it was very, very clear to me that yes, I am indeed not called to be a priest, not called to be religious. And so therefore marriage was more or less opened up to me. But how it ties into
Hmm.
this crisis is that the reason that, at least on my channel, I called this stream, I said Gen Z is cooked, is because we're going to go into some stats in just a second. But the problem is that our society, I genuinely believe, is in such a dark state when it comes to dating and marriage that I think that it's going to take insane graces of God to bring people together. And I say this not because I've not necessarily had success before in the past, but because I see all of these people who I know who are good people who cannot find anybody. And it's not, just one or two odd ducks. It's genuinely like I've joked before. It's like I have some friends who are, 6'4", super handsome looking dudes who, go to the mass, pray faithfully, try to study their faith, have full-time jobs that pay well, and they can't find anybody. And it's like that doesn't make any sense why you can't find one person, not even one person. And I know a lot of ladies on the other hand of the spectrum, they've come to me
Hmm.
and they've been saying, where are all the young men? And it's a mess. So that's why I think it's still worth talking about.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I don't know. People probably don't know this about me, but I have a younger brother that is 19. And so I was a teenager when he was born. I'm a millennial. I'm a younger millennial. And he's Gen Z. And watching the way that he is learning how to date and things like that. He was in a long-term relationship while he was in high school, and they broke up sometime over the last year. Anyway, but talking to him about what that's like for him. What's it like to try and start dating again now, that kind of a thing, versus the experience that I had as a millennial. I mean, cell phones were just kind of becoming a big deal, like while I was growing up, but like social media was just starting when I was in high school. Like I still remember those super old like flip phones that everyone had, sliders. We would type in T9. It was just like totally different environment to grow up in. And I thank God very, very often that I did not grow up the same way that you guys have been growing up. I feel so much empathy for my brother and for you, like the plight that you guys have, because social media and the internet have completely transformed the world in ways that I just don't think we could have predicted, right? Like it's impossible. It's just Pandora's box opened. And I hate seeing where he's at. He's over 6 feet. He's like 6'4" or something. Really good looking kid, very athletic, ripped, like just and the way that I don't know. It's like there's a section of women that are completely delusional about what a reasonable expectation is because they live exclusively online. But the same is also true of a lot of men. And so I feel like that has exacerbated the issue tremendously. But then, yes, you get good Catholics who are faithful, doing everything that they can. They're doing all the right things. And yet it's like they're not connecting. It's the weirdest thing. I don't understand how this is the way that it is. I mean, I met my husband when I was just getting ready to graduate high school, and I feel like I just got out of there by the skin of my teeth because by the time college rolled around and I was midway through college, social media was like huge. You know, it was just a matter of couple years, short few years, and everything changed. But I got married when I was 21. My twin sister got married when she was 30, maybe 31. My younger sister is getting ready to get married and she's 32. It's just totally different. And I have plenty of other family members too that have really struggled to settle down, and people that you're like, that's crazy. Like you're hilarious, you're smart, you're well read, you're just like you would be the whole package. Why don't you have anyone to settle down with yet? But yeah, the data was pretty interesting when I pulled some of that up and sent it along to you because I was like, oh man, it doesn't eh, it's pretty dire. Like some people are wondering, why are we still talking about this? Well, our culture literally needs us to get married and have babies. Like even on a religious, if we took the religious component out, just on a sociological level, we need to start getting married and having babies. It's a big problem. So, and then you add the spiritual component on there and you're like, yeah, this is desperate. This is absolutely desperate.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we want to pull up the stats real quick?
Yeah, let me see. I need to probably or let me open up the what I sent to you here and I'll share it on my screen here.
That works
Um
perfect. Yeah. Yeah, Angela, she found this cool website that basically catalogs all of the dating slash marriage trends in both the millennial generation and Gen Z. So you guys will be able to get, I guess, two generation perspective when it comes to it. But yeah, I agree with you. I think it's absolutely weird. A lot of it doesn't make any sense, but in a way it kind of does make sense. So yeah,
yeah, yep. Can you see it?
we can say perfect.
Okay,
So we can
awesome.
start there.
All right. So, one thing that I was surprised about, well, kind of anyway, the 72% of millennials to make a conscious decision to be single. This I guess we should preface this. This was published or at least last updated in 2024 at the end of 2024. So we're talking, I don't know.
4 months ago or 5 months ago, excuse me.
Well, yeah, December, and when we're almost in July. So we'll say 6, 7 months ago.
Hmm.
And so not that long ago. Really not that long ago that this was last updated. And it's pulling a lot of data from 2022. So 72% of millennials are making a conscious decision to be single. They value freedom and independence. I do see this a lot with the feminism. I'm just not sure that I buy 72%. I'm going to be totally honest. I don't know if they're talking about 72% of single people. They're looking at that demographic specifically and saying 72% of those who are single have chosen to be single. because they value freedom and independence, which I could believe that. And then 75% of Gen Z are single, that is insane.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that that is right?
Oh yeah, no, it's completely right. I mean, I can't think of, outside of a very few cases, the vast majority of people my age that I know are not married. I mean, even in relationships. Like I thought about this the other day, looking at my, TLM service the other day, right? There's like 400 or 500 people there, right? Good amount of people. The only women that are there are either in these categories: old ladies, moms with a ton of little girls, right? Or one or two ladies that are discerning to be nuns. Outside of that, there are 0 single women from the ages of 18 to 25. There are none, which is weird because then you look around and it's like, wow, there's at least 30 guys in here that are 18 to 30 range. There's no women are here. And the thing, it was really weird this last Sunday. I had a there was a new couple that was there, right? And they look like they're younger than me, and they sat behind me. And it's one of these things that it's clearly spiritual warfare, because I remember seeing the couple and getting so mad, not because the
Mhm.
couple's doing anything. Literally, they were fine. They weren't even doing anything. But it's like, really? Is the only time that like young ladies my age are going to come in here is when they come in with their boyfriends? That is literally the only time, which is like, where else are you going to find somebody, which we'll get into later. But you're just sitting around
Mhm.
scratching your head saying, the place that ideally you should be able to find someone, there's no one there.
I want to comment on Darren's comment here. 30% blame their financial situation. I would say that a lot comes from presumed expectations. I totally agree with this. I mean,
Yeah.
I've seen so many TikToks or things, I don't know, things posted online. I'm not really on TikTok very much, but women saying that they want to marry somebody who's making at least 6 figures, yada yada yada. Absolutely insane. Are these like, does anyone teach finances anymore? Like at all? That just
No, we
blows my
just teach
mind.
DEI.
People, it's so nuts. Like I sit there and I think about like what my husband was making when we got married. And yeah, he was making probably better money than most people because he's a lineman and got into a dangerous line of work. But like even generally speaking, most people are coming out of college with tremendous amounts of debt,
Exactly.
tens of thousands of dollars in debt, or hundreds of thousands depending on the degree, and they're earning, if you like get a really good job right out of college, a really good job coming out of college might be 60K on the high end, like on the high 60 to 75K on the high end of earning potential right out of college. I mean that's a lot for somebody who recently graduated. Most people are making between 30 to 45K. And
Yeah.
these women are expecting 100K? Like, are you planning on marrying a 40-year-old?
Mm-hmm.
Like, who's been well established for a long, what are you even talking about? Not only that, but like the data shows over and over again that married men out earn single men. And so like
Mm-hmm.
because they have something to work for. Like most of the time they're like going to put in the extra hours. They need the extra hours. So their earning potential over the course of time just tends to increase more than that of a single man. Um so these women are like expecting a finished product right at the beginning. I don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
I really
Yeah.
don't.
No,
Anyway, it grinds my gears so bad because I'm
yeah,
like, you
no,
guys
I
are
mean,
nuts.
it is sad because it's like I told this to some teenagers the other day who just recently graduated high school. I said, people got to have realistic expectations, because I said pretty much exactly that you said. People aren't making this amount of money. You got to recognize that one thing about marriage is that you're building something with someone else, as opposed to like coming to the finished product and being like, oh wow, you fulfill all my desires immediately out of the checkbox. Again, it's this
Yeah.
utilitarianism of, I use you, I want you to have this amount of money for my lifestyle, etc., as opposed to a gift of self, which says, like, you're giving yourself to me, I give myself to you as a gift, we work together, we pursue virtue, we pursue God, right? That mentality is completely abandoned. And so
Mhm.
one thing that's pretty crazy is that I think some of the reasons that we do have the singleness is in some of these stats that are kind of in the midway of that first section, when it says right there, it says 56% of women and men have been ghosted.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is really true. And then also the one right above it, it says the most popular reason for ghosting is to avoid
Yeah, I'm
confrontation.
sorry. You guys are weak. I will say that largely as a generation. I'm not saying you in particular, Nicholas, are weak, but I think generally speaking, because you guys have lived almost exclusively online, anything uncomfortable, that and just the neurosis and pathology that has been cultivated
Hmm.
in younger generations. So, and don't get me wrong, millennials are really bad too. It's not just Gen Z or even Gen Alpha or anything like that. There's been, again, social media, I think, has just rotted our brains in so many ways.
Yeah.
But like there is a neurosis that has infected you guys, and confrontation, like working in relationship. I don't think there's something very odd about I think the overall perception of relationship requires work, and people don't always get it right. Like even in friendships,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
people sometimes make mistakes and you have to learn how to forgive one another and work things out. But you guys like are incapable, not you, but most are incapable of doing that. It's crazy. So
No,
I
I
think
agree.
the ghosting is, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Because when you look at the stats above, it says millennials spend an average of 2 hours a day on dating apps, and 74% of millennials and Gen Zers use dating apps. 90% of Gen Zers say that they're done with dating apps, right? They're frustrated with them. And the most popular reason for avoiding these things, or for getting ghosted, excuse me, is confrontation. So what it is it's again, it's like dating apps I think are toxic because as I said in my video, while the use of one is not immoral in and of itself, of course, right? There's no moral principle against that. We've basically turned dating apps into like Amazon shopping. It's, you know,
100%. I
like
agree with you.
I like the way the product looks, I like the description of the product, check. I don't like the way the product looks, I don't like the description of the product,
It
I get
feeds
rid of.
this consumerism. And it's like, yeah, I think Amazon is a good example. I mean, it is like Amazon for dating, and you have all these different all of these different versions, and in some cases Chinese knockoffs. Well, yeah, we didn't talk about transgender issues going into this, but like
Mhm.
people are getting catfished, and then they finally meet up with people and go on a date. I don't know how many of these videos I've seen now. I thought about pulling one up for today that I just saw like this past week, but like, yeah, a guy goes on a date and he realizes he's going on a date with another guy. And
Whoops.
this trans guy got the Chinese knockoff here, who's like, I'm Jessica, clearly or obviously. It's like, no, you're not. You're like Jesse, maybe like a male version of Jesse, or like Jackson, but you're not Jessica. Stop.
Yeah.
That's the other problem. It's so much catfishing. It's not real. Nothing is real.
Catfishing, and then like just really shallow expectations. So like I'll give this example. The other day I was let's see, no diss, but while you're saying dating actually talks to have these stats are
Where
from
better to
Harvard
get
A&M.
the data though?
Yeah,
That's
no,
where people are
exactly.
dating. There's no if you want good data, most people are using dating apps. That's where you get the data. So yeah,
Yeah, they're all on there. But yeah, no, what I'll give this anecdotal example. The other
true,
day
Mary.
I went to a friend's wedding the other day, and this was a Protestant wedding, so I'm not allowed to participate. I'm basically allowed just to be kind of a fly on the wall. So I'm a fly on the wall. I sit through their service, etc., and then I'm talking to some childhood friends after the service, right? And there's this girl that comes and sits down at our table. We're kind of just all at these random tables. And this girl's 22, just recently became like a charismatic, comes from like an atheist and Mormon background, so pretty
Ooh,
dark background,
yeah.
right? And one of my friends leaves, and so it's basically me and this girl right at this table. And I'm talking to this girl, and I recognize in the conversation, because I've been on, essentially like a quasi dating fast for a couple months now. I recognized in this conversation being Catholic is truly such a grace from God, because I'm talking to this girl and she's talking about her dating life. And it's like all of her dating life is secular. You go to a bar or a guy takes her out and he expects to go home with her at the end of the night. And I'm just sitting there like thinking, when you talk to your average trads, for all of the issues we have in the trad community, it's like at least our conversations are like they're so different. They're about the spiritual of their life, or they're about like, what if this king was to have defeated the French Revolution, and you were going back and playing, the what ifs of history. We're talking about philosophy and theology. These poor, these poor kids, they're just so malformed, even just on a natural level, that I had to basically teach her, like what Aristotle's three versions of friends were, because, she thinks that, as long as my friends are nice to me, they can go out and live however they want. It's just, that's not even what it means to be a good friend. And
Right.
so all of this being said, it's like when you look at these statistics, what we see is a lot of malformed people trying to naturally find other people, but they're just not ready. Right. And so this is why, unfortunately, you're having all these weird issues.
So that actually that makes me I kind of wonder um there has been a trend for a long time of extended adolescence amongst adults. And do you think
Yeah.
that that is a contributing factor? Because I think it's getting worse. Like
Yes.
younger people are unable to accept responsibility for virtually anything. Like when I moved out of my parents' house, I must have I was 18. I was a totally independent person at that time, pretty much. Like I don't think I ever asked my parents for a dollar. And I lived on my own. I worked multiple jobs while I was a full-time college student. If I had to, I would commute on the bus. I mean, I did for a long time until my husband bought me a car so that I could commute to go see him. We knew we were getting married. So yeah, he bought me a little Chevy Aveo and I would commute like 45 minutes to go visit him or whatever. But like I rode the bus and I did all that stuff on my own. And um, I feel like younger people are just not equipped. And I don't know if it's because their parents were if they lived in homes where both parents were working and just kind of expected school to teach them these life skills. But I think also that
Yeah.
social media stunted emotional development. Like
Yeah.
I want to see research on that.
It'd be a fascinating PhD study, that's for sure, because I think it's multiple issues. I think one, it's parent. I think one, it's our society's irrational notion of love, right? Like the Disney Channel Eros love. That's what you see taught to children from TV, right? It's a foolish mentality of love. It's not actually like willing to suffer for the good of another person. Two, you see it's around 90% of divorces are initiated by the moms. And so because of no fault divorce, we have a society in which a lot of kids are growing up in divorced homes, right? Like a
Mhm.
fair amount of them. And,
So
it
that also contributes to this inability to know how to work out relationships.
exactly.
Yes, 100%. I could totally see that. They've never seen parents work out their differences.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's like, when you see that, and then you go to a public school, public school's not there to teach you how to get married. Like that's not the purpose of public school. Ideally, that's where your parents should be sitting down and teaching you those things. But it doesn't teach you. And so I think what you see is that they're trying to pick up advice
Grover,
from other
where do
parents.
you think we should get dating stats other than where people are primarily dating and
Well,
like the Pew Research Center and stuff? I'm curious where you guys think the data is.
Grover will
Um,
be mad, and he'll start raging when I say this, but he's just a troll, and so I wouldn't take what he says very
No,
seriously.
he's not the only one saying it. The only thing too that I am like I would like to hear people apart from Grover, to be quite honest. I want to hear like what you guys think the crux of the issue is. Like what do you think the number one or two reasons are why this is a problem right now? Because yes, Nick and I have talked about it multiple times. Like I see your boy EB talking about how women just beat men down. I'm not going to say that that doesn't happen because it certainly does. Like there's this one TikToker that blew up a couple of months ago. Her husband is a lineman and which this bothers me so much because my husband is a lineman and her whole TikTok is basically dunking on her husband and why she is a crappy wife, basically. Like what she refuses to do for her husband because she has this weird idea about marriage being quote unquote 50-50 in every single way, except for her husband is risking his life every day to take care of her husband and to make sure that people have power. It
Yeah.
drives me nuts because I look at my husband like a hero. He's like just people sort of forget that linemen are emergency personnel. But anyway, that was her whole thing. Was her whole TikTok is just dunking on men, and her husband in particular is the what she uses as an example, which is terrible. But I will also say on the flip side of that, there is a real problem with this red pill men movement, and the men who are like swearing off women forever. I will say I've been on the receiving end of a lot of really stupid, quite frankly, stupid discourse directed towards me simply because I'm a woman. And so we aren't doing each other any favors. Like, there is a problem on both sides. It's not a one sided issue. That's why this is so complicated, I feel like. And we're having a hard time figuring out what the right steps are moving forward.
Yeah, I think about it this way. So I think part of the answer is kind of found in the second to last stat, which, I mean, for me as a moralist, doesn't really bother me so much, but maybe there's at least an answer in the stat, which says Gen Z is having less casual sex than previous generations. 24% of Gen Zers have sex on a casual basis. Now, for me, that doesn't bother me because I'm like, good, yes, less fornication equals better society. But what there is a truth in here that we could extrapolate is the following. It's the old adage, who is the gatekeepers of sex? It's women. And so if we find that in our society a common reoccurrence of the issues being men don't make enough money, or there's, the standards are so high,
Yeah.
then what we can do is we can extrapolate from that and say, well, at least maybe while it's true that because both men and women have issues, right, and they both, it takes two to tango when it comes to these problems, I would say the dating culture ultimately, though, because we do live in a matriarchal society, that's just true. We haven't lived in a
Currently, yes.
yeah, it's like we haven't lived in a patriarchal society for a little bit.
Hmm.
Then I think that's where you see that, and I think that that's why you have this weird situation where a lot of young men are very disgruntled, and as we've talked about in other streams, they go to the other extremes, because it's like, think about this: what are the expectations on a more rational level or on a biological level that men and women want with each other? Like, on a biological level, what men want at the end of the day is like, is she cute? Can she be like someone who I come home to, and she provides some peace and calm in my life, and she's there to support me, things like that. That's kind of the core of what men are looking for, and that's a rational desire. A rational desire on the flip side for women is like, can he provide? Can he protect? Can he, would he be a person that our children would be benefited from, right? And that's a good and natural desire, right? Those are kind of the core of men and women desires. Okay, well, while you and I will both hand in hand agree that there are, because of our pornified culture, evil men who abuse women and, have no concept of chastity in marriage. We talked about this in our last stream when it came to the marital debt. I do think that the national discussion is not so much that. The national discussion is, why is it that no men with a lot of good paying jobs can still not find anybody? That's kind of the conversation. Because for men, like, I'm not going around looking for a girl and saying, do you earn this much money?
Right.
I'm just
Yeah,
like, do you
most and the
pray?
data in here, I know some aren't really caring so much about the data, which is fine. But um, yeah, a lot of the data is even saying like men don't care as much about that aspect, obviously, which makes perfect sense. Sometimes I think data can be helpful, but sometimes a lot of it is just like common sense, right? Like, men aren't going to be as worried about some of this stuff, um, about how much what the earning potential of women are, versus like themselves, because they're looking to provide. Generally, not
Yeah.
always though. I mean, that has also shifted a lot, where a lot of men don't, for example, want their wives to go back to work after they have kids, or they defer having children because they want their wife to be at a certain income level. It's just things like that, because that does happen as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because it's like, at the end of the day, Nick is not looking around saying, does she make this amount of money? He's just saying, is she pretty and can she pray? That's pretty much
Right.
that's kind of the basic crux of it. So I think that that's kind of, men and women can, again, they use each other in utilitarian means. It's like, a lot of women are looking for men because of their wallet, and a lot of men are only looking at women because of their body, and it's like both of them are wrong. The
Yeah.
mean between them is like, okay, you should have rational expectations, but the key phrase is rational
I
expectations.
said you, James, I said you don't care about this data. I agree with you. I think a full study on this would be excellent. I just think right now the best place we can get the data is through dating apps because that's where most people are dating. I don't know why you're construing this like I don't want good data. I absolutely do want good data. I just think this is the best place we can get it right now. So
Taffy, you
anyway,
bring up a good point. It leads into the broader issues. Like nowadays, even a good paying job can afford a house. A lot of
yeah,
areas, women don't want to move away from their family or friends, and they require top percentile. That's also something that you do see in a lot of the data, is that it's usually around like the
yeah,
10% of guys who do make, an astronomical amount of figures typically ends up getting married to somebody. All of this to be said, the way I think that this leads, yeah, BlackRock, so true, so true.
yeah.
Um, what a lot of this comes down to, I think, is the issue when it comes to the demonic. So it's like mental illness. You're right, Roy. Mental illness has
We
a
touched
part to
on that a
play.
little bit, but yes.
Yeah, it definitely has a part to play. But I think the demonic is one area as well. And this is where I think people don't really think about this as much. So it's like Our Lady of Fatima talked about, and you've seen some other private revelations, and people like Bishop Sheen talk about the importance of, in these last days, the battle between men and, or excuse me, between God and Satan is going to be in the realm of men and women in the context of marriage, right? That is something that's true. And so I think that that's why sometimes we need to recognize that maybe these issues, because like all of these stats, they're just, they show the superficiality. Like we're
Right.
sitting here scratching our heads. I think that some of this has to do with the demonic, because it's like Satan's done a pretty good job thus far of destroying marriage in Western society. It's like, okay, let's just break it down. You got contraception, you got abortion, the redefinition of quote marriage, the redefinition of gender, fornication culture, right? All of these things. So it's like we've had row after row after row after row after row. IVF, you can include in there, of course, as well. All of these things. Why
Mhm.
would not another like piece in that pie be like not making sure holy people get together? You know what I'm saying? Like strategically,
Right.
that would make sense.
So what do you think then? That's a part of the puzzle, but like, what do we do then to confront that? And like, what did you come out of your retreat going like this? I don't know the way forward, I guess, because everyone's just feeling like Nick is just crashing out again, over
Mhm.
the dating thing. But like, what do we do to solve this? I feel like we keep asking this question, and I think you're right that we need to start focusing more on this demonic element about it. How do we confront that specifically in a
Yeah.
world that is just steeped in the demonic?
Yeah, that's the question. I think two things. One is more broad for everybody, and then the second is more of a specific example that I'll give. So out of the retreat, what I learned from this is that ultimately it is going to be God who is the one who will lead and guide you to someone if it's truly conducive for our salvation. Because it's like, let's be honest, maybe one reason why God keeps people single is genuinely a grace from God because we're not ready, right? Because as we've talked about, if we are ill formed, then God's not going to give us something that might actually crush us and maybe damn more souls. So it's like, I've said this a zillion times on my show, but it's like, guys, if you're still going to the confessional for pornography over and over and over
Mm,
again, you can't lead yourself to heaven. So why do you want to lead a wife and kids? You can't. There's the old adage that St. Alphonsus gives about a priest where he says, a priest takes 1,000 souls with them to heaven or to hell, right?
mm,
That's why you have to have a really good priest, and it can't just be, I like Father Bob's jokes. No, it's like, it has to be a good and holy priest. Same basic principle for marriage. It's like, ladies, you have to pick a guy who's actually holy, right? Maybe he doesn't make 150K a year. Maybe he only makes 50K a year. But if he's like striving for holiness, that's a good thing that people need to take into account. So I would say, one, just recognize first that maybe it's not God's will in the immediate sense. Two, even with that, recognize that maybe there needs to be more discernment involved in the broader sense. Now, I'll give you the person example. Now, I can't get into all the details of what I'm about to say. I'll tell you, Angela, behind the curtain later, because I actually think you might find some interest in some of this later. But for me personally, what I did was I prayed to God and I just said, look, you have to make me into the person that can be ready, right, to get married.
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, I've had a business offer that's been placed before me absolutely out of nowhere.
Hmm.
And let's just say if it goes through, as I'm thus far seeing it will go through, I will not only have no issues with finances for the rest of my life, but I'll also be doing a job that I thoroughly love, probably till I die.
Hmm.
So it's a teaser for all of you guys. I will just say this much.
The
Um,
real reason for this stream.
no, yeah, the real reason, yeah,
Oh.
what I will say is, like, for all of the people out there, my show might drastically change. Let's just say it might drastically change in the future, but we'll
Hmm.
uh we'll leave that until the future. But just keep that in mind. But the point I use with this illustration is that sometimes God lets you stay into a place until you're ready, and some of us just aren't ready. Like, that's the problem. Like, I when I even kind of post some of these job opportunities that have kind of come my way, I've recognized, dang, I've not really been ready. And God is in a way answering my prayer. But, like, apply that basic standard to you guys. Like, okay, maybe it's not finances. For a lot of guys, it is finances. Like, you can't even feed yourself, much less a wife and kids. So you have to figure that out. But maybe, again, maybe it's a moral issue. Maybe it's a physical issue. It's like you never exercise, right? And so there'd be no way for you to even maintain a healthy lifestyle or protect your wife if it came
Hmm.
to be. Ladies, on the flip side, is it's like maybe like it's sad, it's kind of ironic, but like every time I talk to a girl and I can tell she has issues, I somehow weave into the conversation the question, um so how's your relationship with your dad? Like, and that's a big question that will illuminate things. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying there's not psycho dads out there. I'm not saying that, right? There of course is, right? There's messed up people here, there, and everywhere. But right, when you find, for instance, like with lots of these young ladies, and you find out, oh, he was this horrible, Republican who wanted me to like respect myself. It's like, well, was he actually that bad, or did he not want you like sleeping around a ton? Like, I mean, that sounds like a good dad to me. I would be telling that to my kids, like, yeah, save yourself for marriage. Or things like, oh, my father, he wanted me to take responsibility and take care of my car. He was always just has his thumb on me. Well, that's not a bad thing. What's going on here? And so, ladies, maybe sometimes it needs to be things like, do I have a bad relationship with my dad? Not because he's actually a bad dad, but because like I have an obstinacy spiritual problem. That's just another example. It's like, do I
Mm-hmm.
suffer from a lack of humility and I suffer from obstinacy? Fill in the blank. Point is though, I genuinely believe that if it's this is where I'll wrap up, at least when it comes to this, is that the big principle I learned in this retreat was, if it's conducive to my salvation, God will at least give me that grace. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's true. And it's
Yes, and
like,
that's the thing that you can trust. Every single person here can trust in that. Like all things are ordered towards the good of those that who love him, and um, I think a lot of it is like surrender. I think I kind of wonder especially here in the US, I'd be curious about what this looks like elsewhere. Somebody else kind of commented that earlier too, but I agree. I want to know if this is like a unique issue in the Western world in particular, because I wonder if we've become so materialistic and we've had so much at our fingertips. We have any knowledge at our fingertips that we've never had at our fingertips before. We can have all of these possessions. We send them to our door and it's on our doorstep overnight or in 2 days or whatever. You just have so much that you have access to. And God is like, yeah, but you need to want something that like can't just be bought. Like, I don't know if it's sort of this way that God is treating us to surrender, like teaching us how to surrender more, because we're
Detachment.
not used to that. We're so used to having control over almost everything in our lives. And this is a way that the Lord is teaching a lot of us surrender.
Yeah, it's detachment. I remember one of the times that was like a really low point in this discernment journey about marriage was maybe about a year ago. I can't fully remember. It was either 6 months to a year ago. And I remember going into this adoration chapel at nighttime after hanging out with some friends and just being really, really down about this whole subject. And in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament, I do remember having this thought that came across my mind, which said something like, if I asked you to to give up marriage, would you do it? And what it is it's the voice of the shepherd who maybe he's not calling you to actually not get married, but maybe what it is it's like if you're actually praying to be a saint, one of the big steps to sainthood is detachment from everything. We're only allowed to be attached to God. And our attachments are typically, I mean, convicting line for everybody out here. Most of you guys, I presume, go to communion every single Sunday, right? You go to mass every single Sunday, you go and receive communion, right? You go to confession every single week. St. Alphonsus comes and kind of gives a proverbial slap on the face to wake us up, and he says, do you know why so many of your communions and confessions, you're receiving them in a state of grace, but they're not actually giving you much grace or changing your spiritual life? Do you guys want to know the reason why? He says, because we're attached to physical things. We're attached to things. We don't want to give up our favorite food.
Mm.
We never want to fast. We never want to do actual penances. We never want to suffer for Christ. We don't want to do any of these things. We want basically to have our nice house, 4-car garage, perfect children, white picket fence, and my Catholicism on Sunday. When the early church is like, being persecuted here, there, and everywhere, we have brothers and
Mm.
sisters in Christ right now who are being killed and crucified by evil organizations around the world who are suffering. And, they're not complaining about, oh, the AC is not on in my church, or stuff like that. We're not willing to suffer. And so what we need to do, especially right now in our spiritual lives, is actually ask the question, like, am I truly and actively asking the Lord to help me detach from stuff? And sometimes they're big stuff like, are you willing to recognize that marriage, while it's a good thing, is an attachment? Because if we truly, right, can give up these things, we'll be able to rightly enjoy them later. Because
Hmm.
God will say, these will recognize these are gifts to be enjoyed by God, not gifts to make our God.
Yeah. That's really, I think that's very well put. And I was just going to add to, I think this is also actually some of the problem. I'm not saying that uh, young women shouldn't. Obviously, the ideal is that your girlfriend attends mass and the sacraments, all of that stuff. It's not what I'm saying, but I think for both men and women, this goes back to like that should be the bare minimum, right? She attends mass and goes to confession, that kind of thing. I just look back at when I was in my early 20s and I was somebody who frequented the sacraments. In fact, there was a time in my life where I was going to daily mass, but my life was an utter mess. And so I think it's really important that we look at our potential future spouse or whatever, anyone that we're interested in, realize you're not getting a finished product. And so the real question to me is, do they have humility and a willingness to grow? Like, do they have a growth mindset in the faith or in their personal life, all of that stuff? Because that's going to be a key indicator of if they are able to grow with you in marriage. Like, do you guys both approach relationship with a growth mindset and a willingness, especially for men, to lead? So let's say you meet a girl, she's really nice, she checks a lot of the boxes, but maybe she doesn't go to confession. Like she wasn't taught that that's like important to do. Are you leading her and showing her like this is really important?
Mhm.
I think it's part of the problem is we're so used to looking at other people and making sure that they check off all the boxes that, again, kind of going to what you're saying is like, are we checking the boxes? Are we
Mhm.
like mortifying ourselves and growing, making sure that we're growing in virtue? Because I think that has to be the priority, and you have to look for somebody who has a willingness to grow with you, uh, especially within the faith. So, anyway, I just think, especially if you're in your young 20s or something, there's just so much growth that happens. I'm in my early 30s now. And my husband and I have been married for almost 12 years now. We have 6 kids. I am not the same person I was when we first got married or when we first started dating when I was 17. And I thank God for that. But I'm grateful that he gave me a chance, and I'm grateful that I gave him a chance because he wasn't a perfect person either, and he had a lot of room to grow as well. Especially he wasn't even Catholic, so
Hmm.
I just I want people to maybe pause a little bit more. You're not getting a finished product the day you get married. The purpose of marriage, people spend so much time getting ready for their wedding day, and they spend tens of thousands of dollars on this single day, but they don't prepare for marriage. And
Yeah.
like that's just the beginning, you know? So you have a whole lifetime hopefully with this person. So when you're looking at potential spouses, look for somebody who is humble and willing to meet you halfway or and grow with you. So anyway, I just think that maybe that's part of the problem too. Is like we're looking for a finish. Everyone's looking for a finished product, and that goes for the spiritual life, not just the material.
Oh yeah, no, that I was about to say it's basically the same general mindset that you can have in the secular sphere where it's like, oh, you have to make this amount of money and yada yada yada. And it's like, well, you should be there's a rational expectation. Like, yeah, you should have a job, right? That's a rational
Right.
expectation. It doesn't mean you have to be making 100 grand, but that's a rational job. Same thing with the spiritual life. It's like, are they Catholic? Are they willing to grow? Right? That's at least a good first step. Ideally, you try to find the holiest person you can, but also recognize sometimes that a lot of the holiness is going to be shown through you because it's kind of like this. This is a good discernment method for people out there. Sometimes for people, you just kind of close your eyes and picture where do you see the most real version of yourself when it comes to, if you will, the paths that you could take. Three paths for men, of course, and the two paths for women. It's like, do you see yourself with all your flaws and all of your issues in the priesthood, in religious life, in marriage? Where do you see yourselves? And oftentimes, like for me, one of the ways I found out it was marriage is that when I thought of myself as a priest or in religious life, it was like this cartoon version of Nick that was all just prim and proper and perfect. And then in marriage, I saw myself as I am with all my flaws, but my flaws now being exposed to another person and me having to correct these flaws. You know what I'm saying? And actually see if I can get out of these things.
Willing to grow, I can change what I don't like about them. That's actually not at all. That's a very immature way of looking at that. Like I don't know about you, but like I said, I'm not the same person I was 10, 15 years ago. I grew up I used to call myself a pro-life feminist. I am not a feminist by any stretch of the imagination, but I identified as one, for example. But I was willing to reconsider my position on that. That's not like, oh, my husband didn't ask me to like change or anything. He didn't care. I'll be quite honest. I don't think
Hmm.
he cared because he didn't think much about it. Um, I think, yeah, it's wrong if somebody's just wanting you to change just to fit some sort of box that they perceive that they want. I'm talking about growth being ordered towards virtue.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Specific kind
so
of growth.
yes, it's a different kind of growth. It's one where you grow closer together. And often it's through struggle and trial. So I think the most growth that happens in marriage is during periods of time where it's really tough, like really, really tough. I think sometimes people go into marriage thinking that it's like going to be perfect all the time, but marriage is hard work. And it's amazing because when you go through those really difficult seasons, you sometimes you feel like you're not going to come out of it on the other side like okay or like ever, like it's never going to end. And then
Hmm.
you do, and your marriage is so much stronger than you could have possibly imagined. And it just continues to develop that way. And that's the kind of growth my father-in-law and I were just talking about how here in the upper Midwest, it's been raining constantly for the last like 2 months.
That's
And
nice.
well, not exactly, because you actually want a stressed crop, at
That's true.
least in the
Yeah.
beginning,
Hmm.
right? Because what happens when you get like some good watering in the beginning, the plant germinates and it starts to grow roots. But what happens if it keeps raining is that those roots never get deep and strong because it doesn't need to seek water or seek nutrients. It's all right there. And you end up with a soft, mushy root. But if the plant is initially stressed a little bit, those roots dig down really deep to look for more water and nutrients. And then hopefully you get more water and it grows really nice and tall and strong. And so you want kind of a stressed plant at first. And I think the same is true in the spiritual life. Like at times you need to be stressed so you dig down deep roots. And then the water comes, you get consolation, and you're able to grow, and grow in a strong way. So, and the same is true in marriage. Like there are times where you're going to be more stressed, and you can either dig deep roots or you can wither off and die.
Hmm.
But yeah, so that's what I mean by grow. I mean like you're growing together ordered towards virtue and the good of the other, and that sacrificial love that is marriage. But a lot of dating is learning how to do that a little bit. I mean, you're learning it in not the same way, obviously, as in marriage, but you're starting to see, like, is it possible to do that with this person, essentially?
Hmm. Yeah, no,
So
exactly. Exactly. And I think that's a healthy way of looking at it. To close, do you want me to tell you the crazy demonic related stories that came from the retreat? Because there was demonic stories that came from the retreat.
yeah, yes.
So people, I gave you all the like really fun, beautiful, glorious, and also somewhat sad, but like stuff that came from the retreat. There was demonic stuff that took place there, like actually legit evil. So the first one, it was weird. So as I said earlier, like my AC went out. The end of the story of the AC is that by the end of the week, I went and turned on the car to check the AC to get working on it. It was fine, completely fine. But it was after I had done my general confession, which was really, really weird. And it was after I put it out of my mind, thinking, "Don't think about this because it's a
Mm,
distraction."
yeah.
But here are the weirder ones. So, mind you, in Texas right now, it's really hot, right? It gives a purgatory run for its money. It's really really hot. It gets up to 109 degrees with the heat index and the humidity, right? I mean, it's a lot of stuff. And so what ends up taking place is that all of us, we're all in these nice rooms and we all have our AC churning. Well, I had some friends who were on like the third floor of this one particular building. The first 2 nights, they couldn't sleep at all, right? They just could not sleep at all. It was really weird. There was just stuff keeping them up. And both of them, if they did kind of doze off, they would wake up and randomly their AC, it would be absolutely freezing. It'd be like down in the 30s all of a sudden. And they're on a
Ugh,
top floor, which means they should be getting like the most heat, objectively speaking.
right.
And it's blaze or it's freezing cold. They would also have I had one friend who, I mean, we're out in the middle of absolutely nowhere. There's no buildings around, there's no town around or anything like that. And he saw these orbs flying up into the sky outside of his window, these flashing lights. And he said it looked like someone shooting a flare gun off, but there was no flare guns. There's nobody out there, right? But there would be these orbs passing by the windows. And all of that stuff would happen both nights. That first night that I woke up, I kept my room at like 65 degrees, right? Because it was pretty warm outside.
Hmm.
I woke up and these are thin sheets, right? Super thin summer sheets. I woke up drenched in sweat as if I had broken a fever. And the heat still said 65 degrees, but it didn't matter. Like the room was burning hot.
Hmm.
And then it would be stuff like that. I had friends who we all had watches, like old school watches to keep the track of the time because we don't have our phones. And I had a friend whose watches would literally start changing when it came to lectures about like the love of Christ and the death of Christ. Like they would
So did you tell the priest there needs to be an exorcism?
Well, what was crazy is that in hindsight later, we noticed that the priests weren't
Oh.
eating very much food. They were always praying. And we were like, oh boy, like that's actually kind of interesting. Well, this is what's crazy. After we receive our general confessions, all of the stuff stops. Everything stops in the entire camp.
Oh, that is crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's like, what the heck? And so we're all like experiencing this just really crazy stuff. Wait, I had this one guy who he told me after the retreat, like the first 2 nights had these just super dark, graphic nightmares, just like the most hideous nightmares that he had ever had in his life. And again, after the general confession, they're all gone. Like he just slept like a
Hmm.
baby, just no issues. And so like what I want to point out when it comes to all of this is it's like, demons are trying to get you to commit sin. And the sad thing about demons, amongst many sad things about demons, is that, demons in a one way, they take sadistic delight when we're in sin. But every time we commit sin, St. Thomas teaches that demons actually, they become more and more sad because it's more and more against what their original nature was calling them to do, which was to help humans perfect in virtue. And it's like Satan will try whatever he can to get you to, you know, if you will, fall. All this being said, this is why I do think it's really important for people to actually consider things like going on a retreat and actually dealing with some of these sins. Because while legitimately and objectively, yes, if you do confess with genuine contrition and confession, right, your sins, you will be forgiven of those things. I do think a lot of Catholics, I mean, think about this. A lot of Catholics aren't really schooled very well when it comes to their catechism or the Bible. I guarantee you they're not very schooled when it comes to like the art of spiritual warfare. And spiritual warfare is real. And just like any natural battlefield where you have two generals and strategy has to be planned out between these armies, same thing in St. Ignatius's mind, right? You have the camp of the Lord and the camp of Satan, and you need to figure out who you're going to choose. I would assume most of us have chosen the camp of the Lord, but let's be honest, you don't want to be the person who sneaks off at night or when no one's back is turned or when no one's looking and you go and hang out in the camp of the devil. Right. And so we need to actually examine what the church has put forward when it comes to spiritual warfare. And that's why I want to recommend everyone to go and check out the Mr. Dan Burke's website, right? He's really, really good. If you're wanting like a good place just to start and stay
Mhm.
for a while, is Dan Burke's website over at the Avila Institute. Right, they give a lot of really good, practical, super simple, step-by-step instructions on how to engage, not just in spiritual warfare, right? That's the big thing of what we're talking about, but also just how to practice a good and holy interior life. Because, a lot of times people think the spiritual warfare is like, yeah, there's a demon flying through a window and someone throwing holy water up against it, and there's exorcist stuff going on, right? And it's like, that stuff I'm sure does happen in extremely rare cases, right?
Right.
Like St. John Vianney, his bed getting lit on fire by the demons.
Yeah, or
But
like
it's like,
Padre Pio like waking up to Satan in his room and he looks at him and says, "Oh, it's just you." And he like rolls over and goes back to bed. That's like one of my favorite after having been beaten up by Satan however many times physically,
he's
beaten
like,
up
oh, it's
by
you.
yeah. Yeah. I love that story about him. Like, "Oh yeah, it's just you."
Yeah, it's like unless you're that person, which I would assume most of us aren't,
No.
unless you're that person, a lot of it is going to come down to things like, hey, why are you so attached to your iPhone when you should be engaging in mental prayer? Can you like not turn off for like 10 minutes to go engage in mental prayer? Or do
Yeah.
you have to be that person on YouTube or Twitter or Instagram who's always just railing about some issue that's going on in secular society or the
It's a
church?
distraction, right? And like
Mhm.
it's always keeping us looking out instead of looking in. I think a lot
Exactly.
of that's what distraction does. Um, that and that points again, kind of going back, circling a little bit, but that consumerism that we have been immersed in for so long is like constantly looking for other things to fill this void. And that's really the core of it, right? Like we're very accustomed to that. And I'm actually going to be publishing this week, hopefully at some point. I wanted to do it earlier this week, but my husband worked all weekend. We had so many storms coming through. So anyway, I didn't have as much time to edit, but I recorded an interview with Jordan Burke, Dan's
Mhm.
son, about the demonic and how it interferes in our mental and emotional state and ultimately our spiritual life, because it's all in- interconnected or integrated, which is like the whole point of my podcast, but really talking
Mhm.
about that and the attachments that we have and how the demonic goes in often unwittingly through the attachments that we have and even attachments to wounds that we have. Um,
Yeah.
so because sometimes we don't realize it, but we have wounds that like are unaddressed and we develop attachments to those wounds without even realizing it.
No, so
And it
it becomes our
changes.
identity.
It does, and that's exactly what we talk about. So, if you're not, I'm just gonna might as well plug. But if you're not subscribed to my channel, you can head over there, and we're gonna be publishing that here later this week. But I love the work that Jordan and Dan do. I think it's really good stuff. They actually have been going through the Ignatian spiritual rules on
Mhm.
their podcast, the Devil's in the Details. And they just do such a great job of presenting everything, not in a sensational way, but just very matter of fact, wanting to equip people in their spiritual lives this way. So, anyway,
Yeah, exactly. That's good. I mean, because again, so much of it, I like the way you outlined it because, you can think about it. It's like, what if you had a soul who has wounds from, let's say, like his parents or his siblings or a
a lot
friend?
of men have mother wounds that, like,
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't like don't even realize it. So, yeah, it's
Oh,
just
yeah. I've
oh,
I've told. I've told my audience like that's what it's generally been with me. What's your channel name? It's Integrated
Integrated
with
with Angela
Angela.
Erickson.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yep.
I always leave your
So
last name out for some reason. I'm just like Integrated with
it's
Angela.
okay. Well, the only reason I had to put my whole name on there is because once I started like putting all this stuff together, I realized that there were a lot of podcasts out there, usually health podcasts that are integrated on, and
Hmm.
like that was kind of, so I'm not very unique that way. So the only way I can make sure people find it is if they put my name in there. So then it would, even though my name is super like not unique at all. You like Angela Erickson is such a common name, but that's perfect. That's good. That's good for me.
You're like, I looked it up and there was already 6 channels called Integrated with Angela, and
Yeah,
I
exactly.
need to avoid that. You know, you're right,
Yeah.
because it's like, I mean, I've told this to my audience, but it's like, my core wounds from my childhood were mother wounds, and they led to certain like predominant faults. And then I realized that like sometimes the way that predominant faults manifest can be in simple things like, are you making sure that you're going to bed on time? Are you making sure that you're eating healthily? And it's
Right.
weird because again, like we tend to sensationalize things and think that, spiritual warfare is just this really showy, flashy, dramatic thing. When in
Mhm.
reality, it's like, well, don't you know a lot of your spiritual combat could be fixed if you just eat well?
And like took a nap.
You took a
It
nap.
makes me think of Elijah when he's like despairing, you know?
Hmm.
Oh my goodness, I wish that I could die. Just kill me now, God. And then he's like, yeah, I'm just gonna feed you and take a nap, and you can take a nap. And he wakes up and he's like, all right, let's go on to the
So
next
true.
part of this mission, you know? Yeah, and so much of but the thing is that that's why I started like my podcast, right? Is trying to focus on reintegrating the mind, body, and soul, and ultimately the impact that has on culture. Like I hope that we can figure out this dating problem because it is so disintegrated and things are I think there's a lot of hope. Like I just am a very optimistic person actually. Like I kind of am, I'm a realist, but I'm optimistic because I just think
Hmm.
God can do anything. And so like I have a lot of hope right now actually. I just feel like the tide is turning and the pendulum is swinging the other direction. And so even though in some parts it's kind of swinging too hard as an overcorrection, I'm overall hopeful that like we're going to figure this out and God is just going to bless his people. I think right now we're in a stress time. We're digging deeper roots right now, and
Hmm.
I think it will bear fruit.
Yeah, I agree. So do you have anything before we close? Do you have anything aside from the one episode that you want to promote on my show? Because it's like we're streaming to both channels right
Yeah.
now.
Well, yeah. So I just had a really great episode with Nancy Charles. Yeah, I love her. I don't know if you've I'm sure you've watched her her first testimonial, I guess you could say, when she shared her story for the first time was over on Avoiding Babylon. She's been on my channel now a couple times, but we had a really great show talking about same-sex attraction and like how to deal with it in the church and how we need to start talking about it in a more mindful way that acknowledges the dignity of those who have same-sex attraction. So that was a really good one. I think that was helpful. I got a lot of good messages from people saying that they really liked the episode, and I feel like it's kind of a topic that doesn't get discussed maybe as much as it should. So I know I'm looking at the comments, sorry not to pay attention to the comments in here, but anyway, so that's one thing. A lot of good stuff hopefully coming out. But what about you? Because I know my channel is a lot smaller, and I think most of the people that follow me probably already follow you, but let's say that they don't. Let's say that there's somebody listening that isn't familiar with your work. What are you doing right now
Yeah,
on your channel?
I'm not really good when it comes to mom stuff out there. So if you're looking for a mom show, I wouldn't be your guy. But
Mine isn't really a mom show, by the way.
it's not. It's not.
I'm just a mom with a webcam.
That's so true. Mom with the webcam. I'm a guy. I'm a random guy with a webcam. That's who I am.
Yeah. Mhm.
So for me, I will say, okay, two things. One, uh, because of this business deal, my show might be changing fairly quickly, fairly
Quickly.
radically. Yeah.
Really?
Which I'll tell you about why. But let's say none of that happens, right? What we're going to be continuing to do is our regular scheduled program. Thus far, what I'm doing right now is essentially 3 projects. One, I'm just kind of going through ascetical and mystical theology. Not as cool as Dan Burke in the sense that where he has all the flashy webcams and discussions with people, but I'm just going through an old textbook. The old textbooks are pretty helpful, and people have found that helpful. Second is just kind of random one-off videos about different subjects. So yesterday I came out with a video called nine sins that attack your Catholic faith. Right. And it's kind of 9 sins that most people don't think about. And there were particularly 9 sins against the virtue of faith. And some of them are kind of obvious for some people, like apostasy, right? Leaving the Catholic Church, or heresy or something like that. But going into things like public school and bad books and mixed marriages in the sense of like Catholics and non-Catholics, I think surprise people. And when you go back and you read the textbooks, you're like, dang, this doesn't sound like my average priest at my parish, right? And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, there's a reason these things have been kind of hidden. And then the third thing, as I started recording it today, but honestly, I sometimes I have a really short fuse, or sometimes I guess I have a really long fuse that eventually just runs short. I think that's a better way of putting it. And I recently just saw this again, this just stupid spat about the SSPX. And so what I'm doing is I'm sitting down. I have like probably 100 pages right now typed out of script. And I am making a gargantuan documentary called Why the SSPX is Not in Schism. And I'm hoping to use this as like a one-shot done in this conversation. Let's finish this conversation on YouTube for good and just send this to somebody as the ultimate, ace of spades thrown down on the poker table at the end of the day when it comes to conversation. So I'm not really, again, like one person who wants to continuously get involved in inter-church disputes, but I do think sometimes they're necessary. And when I continue to see these dumb debates over and over and over again, I'm like, that's it. None of you guys are actually citing anything. You're just parroting people I see online. I'm going to cite a ton of stuff, and then the debate is over because I have spoken. And once I have spoken,
and
it
you
is
are the end
infallible.
all. Apparently, we got Pope Nick here.
Exactly.
Are you taking over for Pope Michael?
Yeah, actually, Pope Michael was succeeded, believe it or not, by Pope Michael II, who's this Filipino guy. And actually, everyone should go. I can't remember what the channel's name, but just type it, people. If you want to laugh, type into YouTube something like Pope Michael II abolishes Vatican II, and there's like a video from like 2 weeks ago where he's like, he's like, I have come out with my motto proprio, abolishing Vatican II, and he's like this dude in white in his mom's basement.
Is this real life? No,
Yeah, it's real life. They have it's like a cult of like 100 people, and so I'm like, yeah, Pope Michael II.
We shouldn't laugh.
Oh no, like I feel bad for him in one sense,
mocked.
but I'm like, look, you put it online, my man.
Oh man,
expect what's gonna happen. So anyway, but yeah, no, in all seriousness, I'm honestly absolutely sick and tired of the SSPX debate, and so I'm literally just making this as like a one done. Everyone get educated, and then let's stop debating the subject, if that makes sense. So
yeah.
Bye Grover. You've run afoul of Angela. She has a shorter fuse than me, but
no, I
actually
have a pretty long fuse. Like I don't mind.
She has 6 kids, and yet you got booted because you were that bad, Grover.
I'm just over it.
Grover is not fun, James. Grover has no soul. I'm not even convinced that Grover is real. I'm not even convinced
Do you
Grover
think he's a bot?
I'm not convinced that Grover is not some like Filipino
I think he's been
guy.
banned. I think he's been banned on almost every other channel. I have not banned him on mine yet, but until today. So
Grover, watch your speech. You need to have some civility, my man.
No, I don't mind if people disagree. I just get tired of people dunking on you or, Anyway.
Poor Grover, but I'm not sad. So.
Oh, no, James is saying what you said was fun. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No. He's I have no ill will against Grover. The problem with Grover is that he just comes off as this like guy who has nothing better to do than harass Catholic YouTube channels. So I've seen him for like 3 years. I'm like, I'm kind of tired of Grover.
Yeah.
Go to a different Sesame Street character and then come back.
Yep. Go back into the corner and think about what you did, Grover.
Exactly. She has 6 kids and she's like, you get out of here.
Yeah, I don't mind heated debate and whatnot. I'm pretty liberal on my own channel about like what people say, but yeah, when it gets to a point where it's like you're gonna just spend the whole why are you watching, essentially? Like I get hate watching. I get that people do that. They hate watch different channels.
I don't see why people do that.
I just think it's a waste of time. It's not good for your soul, honestly. Like I don't
It's like, what kind of sick person just watches people that hate on them? Like, I don't know.
I
Like,
don't
that's some
know.
weird entertainment. Go look at a sunset and have a nice
Go
steak,
touch grass, man. So anyway, well, it was good to be on with you tonight here on the Ascent, primarily on the meaning of Catholic. This how we met and got like started streaming in the first place together on this channel. But yeah, thanks for coming on tonight. Even though I made us start an hour almost early.
Yeah, no worries. It was fun.
And yes, my children are beautiful. I might be a little biased, but they're genuinely beautiful, and I'm very grateful to be their mom. I'm like in the funnest stage of parenthood right now that I've been in yet, and I think that's a whole thing for another day. But for any of you parents out there who are just living in the toddler tunnel, is what I was, a friend of mine called it that, and
I like
I
that. Yeah.
totally agree with them. It's the toddler tunnel where most of your kids are still toddlers, and it feels like it's never going to get easier at all. Um, it gets awesome. Like my oldest is turning 10 in August. They're all pretty close together, obviously, having 6 kids in like 9 years. But it's just fun coming into a new stage of parenthood, and I'm very blessed and grateful, and it's awesome. So yeah. Anyway, don't like think it'll never end, because I promise you it will, and it comes faster than you realize. I just feel like time has its own inertia now, and so it just goes faster and faster every year. So anyway,
That's cool. All of you subscribers, you are my broader family. You're my 15,000 children, right? All come to
you
do
you have a lot more children than I do then.
15,000 children. All of you showed up, and I'm happy for everybody who shows up, minus like the dozen sedes that hate watch me because they're like, Nick is bad. He criticized me, and I'm like, get a life, man. So
Yeah. Well, thanks. And James, thanks for joining on and pushing back a little bit. I know I can get a little bit feisty sometimes.
well, if you
That's
just have
just
some legit ones, please send it over. So
yeah,
send
if you have
me.
some better stats, send them our way. We're not opposed to that at all. Or I suppose part of you is like, it's not my job to do the research, that's your
James is
job because
actually
you're the
this like
one, which I get.
secret.
So
James actually probably has like 12 degrees in mathematics, and he's just like, well, actually, I've done this study myself, and he's
yeah.
compiled these
He's a
amazing stats.
sociologist.
He's done
Yes.
these amazing stats. He's like, actually, it is 71%, not 70%, that is given up on dating. So
Yes. Well, and don't give up on dating, you guys. We seriously need you guys to keep trying. I can't be the only one dealing with this underpopulation problem, okay? I'm doing my part. I need more people doing their part, okay?
I'm just saying, and here's a legit plug before we end. Look, people, go out and get married, because remember, people are trying to replace us here in the United States. If you want to get spicy on the last second of the thing, yeah, we're trying to get replaced by billions and billions of illegals, and so definitely have kids, have lots of kids, because otherwise we're gonna turn into South Korea, where they're gonna
Oh.
have their economy collapse in about a decade because of the problem that we're talking about.
Well, on that note,
On that note, everyone have a good night.
have a great night. We'll see you soon. God bless
Adios.
you.